The lead police officer in the Pistorius murder case is replaced because he faces murder allegations. You're watching Arise News Hour. Our lead story is another bizarre development in the Blade Runner bail hearings. Policeman Hilton Botha, who was the first officer on the scene, faces an investigation into 7 counts of attempted murder. We analyze the effects.
Also tonight, the French deny reports in Cameroon that a French family, including 4 children, have been freed. The Cameroon government says it was a wild rumor. Protests outside the International Criminal Court at The Hague. They want former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo sent home. And ahead of the Oscars, the extreme beauty regimes that lead to a red carpet entrance.
There's a new man in charge of the Oscar Pistorius murder inquiry tonight. He's Lieutenant General Vinesh Munu, and he takes over from the lead officer, Hilton Botha, after it was emerged that Botha himself is facing 7 attempted murder allegations. Botha's evidence was strongly challenged by the defense in the Blade Runner bail hearing.
Now, the hearing completed its 3rd day today. A ruling is expected tomorrow on whether Pistorius will be freed on bail until he faces trial for the murder of his girlfriend Reva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day. We'll be looking at some of the claims and counterclaims that have made the events of that morning seem hazy. But one thing's for certain, as Arise News' Heather Scott reports, it's been an embarrassing 24 hours for South African police.
This morning, the shock revelation that lead detective Hilton Botha is himself facing 7 charges of attempted murder. The veteran investigator was dropped from the case after news he's been charged for shooting at a minibus full of passengers 2 years ago. There have been suggestions he may have been drunk at the time. Hilton Botha was the first policeman to arrive at Oscar Pistorius' house on the morning of the shooting, and it was his interviews with witnesses that formed the basis for the prosecution's case. Botha told reporters his own 7 separate murder charges shouldn't impact Pistorius' chances of getting bail.
Are you still confident that you guys will be successful in opposing bail?
I don't know. We're still waiting. We'll find out tomorrow.
An expert on South African criminal law says the prosecution's made a clumsy mistake.
I don't think that during the bail application as much it will have an impact. It's going to have an impact at the trial stage. And yes, it might compromise the state's case. But again, as I say, that will be the evidence that is dealt with during the trial.
Defence arguments that Pistorius should be allowed out on bail were also bolstered by evidence of what they called shoddy police work at Pistorius' home. Prosecutors had to admit it took 4 days to notice that one of the bullets shot at Reva Steenkamp had bounced off the toilet and was still lying on the bathroom floor. They also agreed that not all the investigators wore protective clothing during visits to Pistorius' home on the day of his girlfriend's death. Prosecutors also backtracked on earlier claims that police had found testosterone and hypodermic syringes in the double amputee sprinter's bedroom. For Oscar Pistorius' family, still waiting to hear whether he will spend the many months of the trial in police custody or at home, today's developments were promising.
Like light controls darkness, truth will prevail. And as we go along, because I know the truth, I know exactly what happened. And I know one thing is that the puzzle is not going to fit where the state want to fit it. It just won't fit there. It fits here on a very tragic scenario where things happened in such a way that Oscar thought it was a intruder.
With no decision today, lawyers will be back in court tomorrow for what court watchers are saying is one of the longest bail hearings ever. Heather Scott, Arise News.
Our correspondent Barry Bateman has been in the court for every moment of the bail hearing and joins us live outside the courtroom in Pretoria. Barry, this has been riveting and it's taken these new turns every day. We're going to get to the lead investigator change in just one moment, but just give us a summary of what happened today during the hearing.
Well, today we started with the closing arguments because the application is being brought by the defence. It was defence advocate Barry Rue who started off. Now, his main thrust today was to discredit the testimony of this very investigator you've been referring to, Warrant Officer Hilton Botha. He's saying that Hilton Botha himself has conceded that there is no evidence, there are no hard facts to dispute the version of his client, Oscar Pistorius. He's saying that his client, Oscar Pistorius, has the more believable version. And he's also arguing on this issue of Schedule 5 and Schedule 6. He's also saying that there are no facts to support the claim or to support the charge in terms of the specific legislation that it be Schedule 6. Now, as we've discussed before, Schedule 6 requires a higher onus on the accused to, he has to prove exceptional circumstances to be released on bail. Now, on the Schedule 5, it's a lot easier, and that's what he's arguing. He's saying there's just no evidence to support that schedule.
There seems to be a dramatic change in momentum, certainly from the first day of the hearing. What about a change in demeanor for Oscar Pistorius? What was his temperament today?
Well, Oscar Pistorius changes like it does his demeanor changes the way, depending on who's speaking. When it's his defense that's up there, he's got his back, he does seem a lot more confident, he's more composed. But when Kharinal, like he did this afternoon, takes over when he was doing his argument, we're talking about the crime scene, we're talking about his allegation. Kharinal saying he wanted to kill whoever was in that bathroom. He does get emotional then. He changes as depending on who's speaking. He does seem like a very fragile person. His emotions aren't in control. And but like I said, when it's his team who is speaking, he is more composed.
Of course, we all heard about the change in the investigator, that Botha is out and Munu is in. Was there any reference to the charges against Botha today in court, or that there be a change in the investigator?
Prosecutor Kharinal, at the outset this morning, he started off, he just wanted to place it on the court record that they only found out yesterday that Botha was facing these charges, and he just wanted to put it on the record. Chief Magistrate Desmond Nair, he was unaware of it. He called Botha back into the court to clarify some issues, but he didn't actually touch on the merits of these allegations against him, and there was no mention of an appointment of a new investigating officer.
So interesting. So both sides have done their summary. Other than the magistrate's decision tomorrow, what else can we expect during the hearing tomorrow?
We're going to have Kharinal, the prosecutor. He's going to finish off his closing arguments. I didn't touch on them a second ago. Would you like me to briefly just summarize those closing arguments from the prosecutor?
All right, Barry Bateman, thank you so much for joining us live from Pretoria, excuse me. Jeff.
Indeed, Debbie. And from Pretoria, we're going to cross over to Johannesburg to get some perspective of the latest twists and turns in the Pistorius defense case. Now, we're now joined by South African criminal lawyer Tyrone Maseko in Johannesburg. Tyrone, first of all, how does Botha's removal change the dynamics of this case?
Well, you know, one has to say that it was something that essentially the police were forced to do. It does change the dynamics somewhat, but not extensively. You got to remember that Botha would have been involved in this matter from the onset. So he would have essentially interviewed all the witnesses and get out all the relevant evidence with the assistance of other experts. So he has first-hand knowledge of the matter. Now, if such a pivotal person is now removed from the matter, it then means the matter has to be investigated by other parties. So they have to bring in external people, as has been announced this afternoon, that in fact there will be another investigating officer who will take over from Botha.
Okay. Moving right along, Tyrone, you must admit the South African Police Services, SAPS, has been left with a bit of egg on their face, a bit of an embarrassing day for them.
It is, indeed. It's a big problem for them because now they've got a new team that's going to come in somewhat cold, and it then has to backtrack and catch up on what has happened. Totally undesirable for them. It's the last thing that they would have wanted. And the other difficulty that presents them now is that evidence has already been laid in this matter. How then do they, at a later stage, and that's what the big problem is, that this thing will eventually get to trial. How are they going to present that evidence that's been gathered to date seeing that they weren't involved in the process at the onset.
Real quick, Tyrone, the last couple of days, it's been good days as a lawyer. It's been a couple of good days for the defense, wouldn't you say?
It has been good days for the defense. I mean, I imagine that they would have put in a lot of hard work into this matter. They've had to do a lot of a short space of time. So good work on their part.
All right, that hearing expected to be sometime tomorrow, and we'll have full details right here on Arise News. Debbie.
Now it's time for the business news of the day, and we're going to throw to our business and economics editor, Michael Wilson.
Thanks so much. That's the one. Yeah, Kenya's power utility company is set to raise electricity tariffs by more than half from next week. Kenya Power has tabled its proposed increase to the company's Energy Regulatory Commission, saying that the existing revenue isn't enough to cover development costs. Kenya Power also wants to increase prices again in July, and from then on every successive year until 2015. Up till now, the company has reviewed its tariffs every 3 years. Critics say that the new tariffs set the stage for fresh inflationary pressures on households and business alike, and perhaps they may have something to say about that in Kenya's elections, which take place on March the 4th. Egypt, the world's largest wheat importer, is struggling to buy the staple in the international market because of its currency crisis, creating a fresh challenge to the government of Mohamed Morsi. Grain traders shipping wheat to Egypt said Cairo had cut back on its overseas purchases as the Egyptian pound plunged against the US dollar. The country's grain stocks have sunk to unusually low levels. According to some traders, Egypt has just 100 days supply left. The Egyptian cabinet said that wheat reserves would stretch another month with the arrival of supplies tended for delivery in March and April. With more than 40% of Egyptians living below the poverty line, subsidised bread is an important part of the Egyptian government's strategy for maintaining social peace and order. Lower inventories make it vulnerable to any disruptions in supply. So to the commodity markets now, and staying with wheat, price fell by around about 0.75% per bushel. Oil fell to a 3-week low on concerns the Federal Reserve might end its stimulus programme sooner than thought, and on the prospect of a rise in Saudi Arabian output. Gold prices recovered slightly after plunging almost 3% after lower prices tempted some buyers back into the market. But those doubts about the US Federal Reserve's commitment to its stimulus plan, called quantitative easing, had pushed the precious metal lower. Quantitative easing tends to support gold because it keeps interest rates low. The rand retreated against a resurgent dollar after those comments from the American Central Bank about its financial package. The Kenya shilling held steady, not a lot of movement ahead of the elections at the beginning of March. In Joburg, the stock market hit a 1-month low as investors dumped risky stocks. In Nigeria, the highlight was Nestle, shedding 2.75% as investors took profits a day after the company said it would pay out 75% of its profits as a dividend. In Nairobi, the market's playing the political uncertainty game before the elections, but so far the blue chips are holding steady. So, in Europe and the United States, the equity markets have set a blazing pace since the beginning of 2013, some up to yesterday reaching 5-year highs. Now, today's seen something of a reverse because of the uncertainty about the US Central Bank's willingness to keep stimulating the economy. But in general, there's a feeling that investors now have a strong appetite for risk, and it appears that the global economy is on the mend. So, how have Africa's stock markets reflected this enthusiasm? I spoke to our correspondent, Sidi Bishop, in Johannesburg.
Yes, Michael, a bit of a plunge described as blood on the floor. The JSE lost 2% in 5 weeks after trading at about 40,000 points for weeks now. They use news coming from the US that quantitative easing measures could be revised, could be phased out, or could be completely scrapped, have seen investors taking away their exposure from what they consider as risky markets.
But of course, that doesn't really apply to African markets over the long term, does it? Because South Africa's got a big exposure to the United States and Europe, but other African markets are very different, aren't they?
Very, very different, Michael. At least today, for instance, look at what has happened to South Africa and look what's happening in Ghana and Nigeria. Apparently, Nigeria has been rallying. Today was one of those positive days where bonds were bought up to 5 times. The US Treasury bonds were bought up to 5 times of what was available in the market. Ghana stocks were also rallying today, and looking forward to all those markets in top Africa. You could see that the developments of some of the governments there trying to restructure their economy, trying to woo investors back into the economy, trying to stabilize their own politics, is making their markets very attractive. On the other side, because of the liquidity exposure in South Africa, we are very sensitive to what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the US as well.
So generally speaking, what you're saying is that the other African markets look headed for growth.
They're headed for growth. Nigeria is a very positive story, and South Africa has been told to fasten its belt because it has been considered for a long time as the gateway to Africa. It has been considered as a long time as the giant in terms of economic growth in Africa, in terms of investment in Africa. But the outlook for the rest of the continent now, it's much more positive than South Africa. The road towards growth in the entire continent, especially countries like Kenya, Ghana, Mozambique, including Zimbabwe. You may laugh at that, but including Zimbabwe, it's looking very positive because investors are looking forward to the election, hoping that the election will yield some kind of certainty for them to go and invest there.
At the same time, investors must balance a lot of risk, mustn't they, against the money they put in there, because there is still risk in these sort of frontiers, if I can call them that.
There is risk, but you know, the kind of risk they weigh is different. They will weigh uncertainty over certainty. For instance, you would be surprised that some of the sentiments that was coming from South Africa was that if there is no certainty of what is happening in the mining industry, they would rather go to Zimbabwe, where they know they will lose 51% of their investment in mining or in any other business. Here, the mixed messages are settling investors. In Nigeria, positive sentiment that is coming out that we are building our roads, we're trying to put money on infrastructure, we're actually balancing our politics. We've had square and fair elections. We are now no longer the pariah state in Africa. We are trying to make you relaxed in terms of your investment. This is making Nigeria to be much more a positive and attractive investment than South Africa. So if you weigh the risk, really you have to look at what are investors looking for. Are they looking for certainty, or are they looking on what you have to offer?
Sidney Bishop, thanks very much indeed. Well, that's the business for now. Still to come, thirsty work for Guinness and the latest hacking on Twitter. Debbie?
All right, Michael, we will see you later. Now, if you're joining us, you are watching the Arise News Hour. We're going to turn to the fate of the French citizens who were kidnapped in Cameroon on Tuesday. Their fate remains unknown. Earlier today, there was confusion after unfounded reports the family of 7 had been released. Jerome Evans reports.
It would have been the outcome everyone was hoping for. This morning, French television announced the kidnapped family of 3 adults and 4 children were safe and well after being released in Nigeria. But within hours, French officials said the report was unfounded and that the location of the hostages remains unknown. The family was seized earlier this week on an excursion to the Waza National Park near Cameroon's border with Nigeria. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attacks. French authorities have named Nigerian Islamic militants Boko Haram as the primary suspects. Paris says it won't negotiate with terrorists.
We need
to do our utmost to free our hostages, but nothing would be worse than giving in. All countries that, like us, believe in freedom need to come together to fight against these terrorist groups. We have, of course, made contact with Cameroon and Nigeria. Measures have been taken which I can't go into here for obvious reasons.
As the hostages' whereabouts remains unknown, the French Foreign Ministry's Crisis Centre has been activated to ensure the safety of French nationals in Africa.
We are the point of contact for the families because beyond the operations on the ground, in order to try and locate the hostages, there is also a very strong human side to it all. because this is an exceptional situation for which no one is prepared.
Tonight, the Cameroon army is working alongside French special forces to continue their search for the hostages along the Nigeria-Cameroon border. Jerome Evans, Arise News.
Now, Anthony Goldman is a specialist in all matters Nigeria and joins us on the phone from Ghana. Anthony, I guess the first question would be, this is not really Boko Haram's method of operation, MO, is it?
No, it's not. Boko Haram isn't the most progressive of organizations. It's been responsible for suicide bombings of churches and isn't above attacking soft targets, if you like. But in the past, it said that it wasn't interested in abducting foreigners, and that wasn't how it was going to operate. A splinter faction, a separate group called Ansaru, which has links to Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, has, however, said that it was ready to engage in kidnapping, and on Saturday kidnapped 7 construction workers further to the west in Nigeria. So it's not clear who's behind the latest abductions, the situation in Cameroon. But it does appear from sources that I've spoken with in Nigeria that those hostages are also now in Nigeria. The Nigerian authorities believe that they know where those hostages are, but are particularly anxious after previous kidnappings in the north to try to bring this one to a close safely. On previous occasions, this situation has ended in a shootout where the hostages have been killed, and I think that every care this time is being taken to try to resolve this peacefully.
Anthony, could they just have wandered off across the border? Because the pictures we are seeing is a car stuck in about 3-4 feet of mud. Could they have just gotten out and wandered across the border and are just basically lost? Or is there anyone who's claimed responsibility?
No, I think that it's true that this is a fairly wild part of the world. It's an area of some lawlessness between Nigeria, Cameroon and Chad, where the footprint of modern government perhaps is fairly light. But I think that there doesn't seem to be much doubt from sources that I've spoken with in Cameroon and in Nigeria that this was an abduction. In Nigeria, that they seem to be fairly confident that they know where the hostages now are, what those who've taken them want, but as I say, are keen to try to make sure that this is resolved in as peaceful a manner as possible.
Anthony, if I could just switch gears for a moment here, and there's a story coming out of This Day newspaper in Nigeria about an Iran being linked to a terrorist plot to kill one of the country's former military head of states, the guy known as IBB, Ibrahim Babangida. What can you tell us about that? And is Iran really linked to this?
Well, look, I think that you have to understand the context of a region that is in some turmoil. I think that we all saw the pictures of the Arab Spring and wondered whether there would be any kind of ripples further to the south. And when nothing appeared to happen in terms of governance or mass protest, people assumed that perhaps sub-Saharan Africa was going to be immune from it. But I think that some of the instability, some of those tensions that were perhaps pent up within some of those countries in North Africa has created space for extremists to move now further south. And we saw that with the coup that took place last year in Mali and the occupation of large parts of Mali by Islamist forces subsequently, which provoked or prompted, if you like, the French to deploy their own troops in Mali last month. And I think that that was an indication of a problem that many people in the region and further afield believed was beginning to get out of hand. And I think that that was why they were so keen to try to make a statement, if you like, to those Islamists, even if in the short term the cost was going to be an increase in instability in the region and a risk of increased hostage-taking and maybe other instances of terror. And in that context, Iran also is a country that sees some space in Africa, has invested quite a lot over the years in trying to understand what's happening in the region and to get its people there. There isn't a big Shia community in Nigeria, so it wasn't, I think, a question of a mass-based movement that they were looking to create. But last year there was an incident of Iranian weapons being seized in port in Lagos, and it wasn't clear whether that was for use in Nigeria or elsewhere in the region. But certainly I think that there are people much further away from Africa who have spotted, if you like, a vacuum that they were seeking to exploit. And I think that the allegations against Iran seem to, the latest allegations from Iran follow a long security operation in the country, and that the particular targets, I guess we'll have to wait to see exactly the details of what stands up there. But I think that the opportunity that Iran saw perhaps to add to instability in an already volatile region is clear.
And real quick, Anthony, if indeed Iran is involved in this plot, how do you think it'll affect relations between Tehran and Abuja?
Well, I think that relations have been fairly difficult, fairly tense for a number of months following the incident last year at the port, and I think that there has been a suspicion of what Iran's agenda is. I don't think there was particularly any suspicion that Iran was trying to create a kind of a mass movement, if you like, in Nigeria. But I think that it's certainly going to make things more difficult for Iran, which, to be fair, has a fairly limited other interests in the region, and perhaps that was why they were looking to focus now on the security environment and any advantage they might have got. But in a sense, in a difficult environment, as the details come out, it might emerge as something of a triumph for the security agencies in Nigeria.
All right, Anthony, we'll have to leave it at that for now. Please keep us posted. That's Anthony Goldman, specialist in Nigerian affairs, talking to us there from Accra, Ghana. And here's a program note. We will have a special report of that plot to assassinate the former Nigerian military head of state and former Sultan of Sokoto in the Arise News Hour tomorrow. Debbie.
Well, it's time to turn to what's happening in the U.S., and we are joined live from Washington, D.C. by our D.C. correspondent, Layla McDowell. Layla, President Obama has good news today. His numbers are up in the polls.
Indeed they are, and he is winning in the court of public opinion on most of the big issues facing Americans today. For example, on immigration, 50% of all Americans support President Obama's approach, only 33% support Republicans. And this poll was conducted by USA Today and the Pew Research Center. If you look at the minimum wage proposal, it is supported by Americans 3-1, according to the poll. And in the popularity contest, the GOP is not faring very well either. Only 22% of Americans consider themselves Republicans, which is a record low. There's an abysmal 25% approval rating for congressional Republicans, and Democrats fare just a little bit better with 37%. President Obama, on the other hand, has a 51% job approval rating, which is slightly higher than he has enjoyed for the past 4 years.
I wonder if he'll be able to make good on that as he tries to push through his own legislations. Let's move now to the gun control debate that still rages on Capitol Hill. A new player, if you will, has jumped into the race. The governor of Connecticut has made his own proposal for a gun control proposal. Tell us about that.
Well, he is expected to make that proposal today, and we don't know the specifics of what he's announcing as of about an hour ago. It followed a meeting with Vice President Joe Biden, which took place in Danbury, just 10 miles outside of Newtown, the site of the horrific shooting that took 28 lives, including 20 school children. It's expected that it will mirror the agenda, however, of President Obama, which includes mandatory criminal background checks for all gun sales, some bans on semi-automatic rifles, limits of magazine clips to 10 rounds, and upping the penalties for gun trafficking. He does face an uphill battle, though, because in order to get this through the Connecticut legislature, he will need both Republican and Democratic lawmakers to support the proposals.
That's Layla McDowell joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you for the update. We'll see you again soon. Jeff?
Thank you, Debbie. You are watching the News Hour right here on Arise. Our top stories tonight. The top cop is out of the Pistorius murder case. In the latest bizarre twist, Detective Hilton Boita is removed from the investigation after it emerges he faces 7 charges of attempted murder. Another day in captivity. The French family of 3 adults and 4 children seized in Cameroon are still missing, despite false reports of their release. And as the Gbagbo trial continues in The Hague, as protesters rally outside the International Criminal Court, they are demanding the former president of the Ivory Coast is returned home.
And we have a lot more for you tonight. With just a few days to go until the Oscars, the great and the good of Hollywood are going to extreme lengths to look their best on the red carpet. We'll tell you about their unbelievable beauty regimens later on in the show.
It is day 3 at The Hague in the pre-trial hearing of former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo. The International Criminal Court is tasked with deciding whether Gbagbo's war crimes trial should continue or whether he should be sent home to the Ivory Coast. Arise News' Sarah Head reports.
A relaxed Laurent Gbagbo yesterday at the International Criminal Court, where he is the first former head of state to face charges against humanity.
We will show that Mr. Gbagbo and forces under his control are responsible for the deaths, rapes, serious injuries to, and arbitrary detention of countless law-abiding citizens, civilians who were perceived to support Mr. Ouattara.
Gbagbo disagreed with the results of Ivorian elections in 2010, which awarded victory to his opponent Alassane Ouattara. His refusal to step down led to violent clashes. Gbagbo was arrested after a gunfight with Ouattara's soldiers. The president had been hiding inside a heavily fortified bunker in Abidjan. His defense lawyers say the trial is political and should be dismissed.
Le peuple ivoirien aurait mérité, Madame le Président, Madame Monsieur.
The Ivorian people deserve to have their suffering taken into account. They deserve a trial other than a political trial. They deserve a trial of the real ringleaders of the destruction of the country over the past decade. The court deserves to hear what really happened in Ivory Coast over the years. The court should be able to play a beneficial role in national reconciliation.
Elle aurait pu alors jouer un rôle bénéfique dans la réconciliation nationale.
The 67-year-old one-time history teacher had argued he was too ill to face a trial. The judge arranged for shortened days so as not to tire him out. Defence lawyers say Gbagbo's opponents are orchestrating the trial and that the Ivory Coast's former colonial rulers are also to blame.
Cette affaire est en fait non seulement une affaire ivoirienne, mais aussi une affaire française.
This case is not just an Ivorian one, but a French one too. Allow me to remind you that in 50 years France has intervened militarily in Africa around 40 times. 40 times. Do you think you are able to look into depth, the real reasons for this crisis? This is misleading. Justice is being misled.
En profondeur sur les vraies raisons de cette crise.
Outside the International Criminal Court, hundreds of pro-Gbagbo Ivorians called for his release. They say they want war criminals on both sides to be prosecuted and that won't happen in the Netherlands.
The victims especially hope that also the national courts in Ivory Coast will also conduct proceedings and will take action against all people who committed crimes in Ivory Coast, regardless of their side or political affiliation.
Gbagbo's wife Simone is also facing war crime charges at The Hague, but she has not been extradited. Sarah Head, Arise News.
And now we turn to Kenya, where Kenya's top judge says he's been threatened with, quote, dire consequences if his court bars presidential candidate Uhuru Kenyatta from elections. Kenyatta's candidacy is controversial because he has been charged with crimes against humanity in connection with an outbreak of violence in 2007. Chief Justice Willie Mutunga says he's been sent a threatening poison pen letter, which he showed to reporters.
Makes all manner of threats against judges, ambassadors, and my person. It warns against an adversarial ruling. It warns against an adversarial ruling on the presidential and deputy presidential candidacy of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. The letter extols the violent exploits of the Mungiki movement and threatens dire consequences. I was stopped at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport by an immigration officer who insisted that I could not travel because I had not been cleared by Mr. Francis Kimemia, the permanent secretary.
Less than 2 weeks before the general elections, Matunga sent a defiant message to anybody trying to subvert Kenya's democracy.
I've given most of my life to a better Kenya, and if taking it is what will be required to consolidate and secure our democratic gains in this election or even thereafter, that is a price I'm not afraid to pay.
Kenyans head to the polls on the 4th of March.
At the same time, at least 7 people have been shot dead and another 2 injured after an attack at a mosque near the Kenya-Somali border. The raid happened in Malale in northeastern Kenya, a part of the country that is home to several 100,000 Somali refugees. Villagers say 10 gunmen armed with AK-47s opened fire as people were leaving the mosque after early morning prayers. Our East Africa correspondent Tom Walsh joins us now on Skype from Nairobi with more on those stories. Tom, what's the latest from Malale?
Well, the latest situation at the moment, Jeff, is the officials in Malale say there is no motivation for the attack that happened at around 5:30 a.m. this morning as worshippers went into the mosque. However, this area of Kenya around Garissa is no stranger to attacks by Al-Shabaab. There are frequent grenade attacks, suicide bombings. Even last week, a suicide bomber who was making a bomb ahead of presidential candidate Martha Karua's rally in the region, he himself was killed as he was making the bomb. So it's a very, very tense area. Officials are saying they are in pursuit of the gunman, but it's a huge setback for Kenya and Kenyan security ahead of this national vote in, as you say, less than 2 weeks' time.
Tom, you mentioned a moment ago Al-Shabaab, and it will be very unusual for them to attack a mosque. Again, you mentioned concern ahead of the election, which is what, about a dozen days away? Are they beefing up security in that area? Are there calls by leaders for the security to be beefed up?
Yeah, I mean, security in the election coming up is a big matter. I mean, this isn't just something that has been affecting northeastern Kenya. The threat of Al-Shabaab has been taken all the way to the capital of Kenya itself, Nairobi. This year already, we've been having grenade attacks in the Eastleigh neighborhood, which is known as Little Mogadishu, where a lot of Somalis are. And so Kenyans are very, very worried about the national threat. And there's already talk that if there is any violence during this upcoming elections, that Islamic extremist militants like Al-Shabaab will take advantage of this breakdown in security and launch their own attacks against the Kenyan people.
Tom, if we could just switch gears and come back to that Willie Mutunga story, the Chief Justice, and the alleged letter by the criminal gang known as Mungiki. Now, I've read the letter, or what looks like the letter, and it seems extremely sophisticated by a letter to be written by a criminal gang. That's number one. Number two, real quick, there are calls for the resignation of the head of public service, Francis Kimemia, by, among others, one of the leading presidential candidates. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very serious letter and a huge drawback ahead of the elections. It goes to show that there's a growing tension here in Kenya, and the whole clearance of Uhuru Kenyatta to run in the upcoming presidential elections was a big issue. Now, this isn't the first time, I have to say, that judges in Kenya have been threatened. It was up to very recently that one of the top leading female judges, she was shot at by bandits. And already 5 leading judges in Kenya have been threatened in one way or another. But the Chief Justice has been very defiant in this. He said that he would die protecting the new constitution of Kenya, which urges Kenya and Kenyans to abide by the law and the law only. So despite all this, he is very, very adamant that such people like the Mungiki and these extremist sects will not take over what he is pushing for as a peaceful, fair and judicial election.
Tom, as always, good stuff. Thank you. Keep us posted. That's Tom Walsh, our East Africa correspondent, live there on Skype from Nairobi. Debbie?
Thank you, Jeff. And you are watching the News Hour right here on Arise, and it's time for the roundup of the other news making headlines today. At least 10 people here have been killed and many others injured in twin blasts in the southern Indian city of Hyderabad. The two explosions happened simultaneously at 7 p.m. local time, one at a bus stop, the other at a movie theater. No one has claimed responsibility. The Europe-wide food fraud scandal has reached Hong Kong. Boxes of frozen lasagna have been removed from the shelves in the city after it emerged they could be contaminated with horse meat. Criminal gangs in Europe are believed to be behind the scam. And the world's oldest marathon runner is hanging up his sneakers. But first, 101-year-old Fauja Singh will compete in his last ever race this weekend. Nicknamed the Turban Tornado, Singh only started his illustrious running career at the young age of 89.
What a story.
Yeah, my new hero, right?
101 years old.
There's hope for you, isn't there?
I was going to say, speaking of which.
I wish you hadn't said that. I'll catch you at the end of the programme, don't you worry.
Okay.
Right then, let's get what's happening in the United States. Let's take a look at the American markets and that mixed message, really, from the Fed, the central bank in the United States, caused that kind of effect yesterday and also today as far as the market's concerned. They were very worried as investors really didn't know which way to turn. Let's join in the United States Chitra Norbat, who'll explain that. Chitra, now, there was a big effect from what the Fed actually said. The Federal Reserve. What do you think they actually said?
Well, Michael, that's right. There was a recent meeting of the Federal Reserve, and the debate is on right now as to whether the Fed will continue its quantitative easing plans. And what this is when the Fed stimulates the economy by buying assets. Right now, the Fed is buying about $85 billion in bonds each month. This actually injects cash into the economy. And the Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, he wants to keep doing this until the unemployment rate drops to about 6.5%. Other policymakers, they feel that the Fed should slow down their asset purchases and discontinue the program this year because of fears around inflation. The bottom line consensus view on what's needed are calibration and balance, which is very difficult for the markets to respond to.
Calibration and balance, I love it. Okay, Walmart, decent earnings, but worries about 2013. Why?
Walmart's sales for the year are actually off to a slow start, even though they had solid fourth quarter net income. Walmart is the world's largest retailer, but for January and February, their sales dropped, and that is because customers are spending less. People have higher payroll taxes to deal with, so that puts less money in their pockets. There's higher gas prices, and income tax refunds are actually delayed. Walmart, they're trying to keep prices low and stable to entice customers back into the stores to spend.
As they should. Now, terrible goings on at Twitter again. Getting a bit of a habit, isn't it?
Michael, the Twitter hacking saga continues. Earlier this week, we talked about Burger King. The most recent company to have their Twitter account hacked is Jeep. And this is causing significant security and reputational risk for Twitter. Twitter is having now difficulty attracting brand and advertising revenues from companies because they fear that their accounts will be compromised. Twitter is working to strengthen their overall security infrastructure, but at the same time, they're warning customers to have stronger passwords.
Stronger passwords, though, I see. If you go on Twitter, you better watch what you say. OK, Chitra, thanks very much. European shares fell surprisingly and very sharply as weak Eurozone economic data dashed hopes of an early recovery for the region. This in spite of some better than expected investor confidence out of the zone's biggest economy, Germany, on Tuesday. The Purchasing Managers Indices, surveys which most analysts agree are a fairly accurate reflection of future economic growth, instead of delivering good news, pointed to a contraction of 0.3%. 5%. As one analyst put it, the markets have gone risk off. And the euro, as you might expect, tumbled to a fresh 6-week low, having also suffered as a result of the doubts about the US Central Bank's financial stimulus programme. Sterling trimmed its losses against the dollar and the euro, but it is expected to stay weak due to the Bank of England's leaning towards loosening monetary policy. Nigerians love their Guinness. They're the largest consumers of the Irish black stuff in the world, but they're not drinking as much as they used to. The latest results from the company's Nigerian operation this month revealed a 15% decline in profit. Higher electricity and petrol prices have been attributed to a reduction in drink spending. Guinness says it's now going to target drinkers in rural areas where more than half the country's population lives and where Guinness is not as popular as it is in urban centres. For any thirsty converts, there'll be plenty to go round. By November, the parent company Diageo will have built a $372 million brewery in Nigeria to boost production capacity by 50%. It'll be hoping that the country's economy grows this year in line with analyst forecasts of 6.75%, driven by a boost in agriculture, banking and oil. Jeff's been invited to go along to the opening of that.
Indeed. I lived in Nigeria, and I know for a fact these folks love their Guinness.
You see, it goes to 100 countries. It's brewed in 60. I don't think it travels. Have you never had it in Ireland? I mean, there's something about the water there that's just very different. I just don't think it travels at all. Have you ever had any of it?
I haven't had any, no.
Goes very nicely with a horse meat burger.
Does it?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Perfect.
Yeah,
there
but it's worth doing.
Yeah.
You and I will go to the opening of that. You going to invite me?
Absolutely, Michael. You and I.
Thank you.
And take a designated driver.
That's right. Maybe we'll take that the Taliban turban, whatever his name, the turban.
The runner.
The young guy.
101-year-old man. That might be the secret to his success.
Guinness.
Who knows?
Guinness is the answer. Guinness is good for you.
All right, Michael, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow. You're watching the Arise News Hour, and we are going to move on to French boots. They will soon be leaving Malian soil as the country wraps up its campaign to oust Islamic militants. But the fighting is far from over, as Arise News' Will Took now reports.
After a 2-month-long campaign in Mali, French troops will begin leaving the country in March. But as Paris plans its exit, the French defence minister admits Mali is not rid of jihadists.
Thanks to the professionalism of our armies, we have managed to take back and liberate nearly all of Mali. The most difficult part is still to come.
That was highlighted today as heavy fighting returned to Gao as the Malian army tried to flush out militants holed up in the town. With pockets of resistance remaining throughout the north, scenes such as these are set to continue. But the Malian army will be getting help. The EU has just signed an agreement to send 2,500 military instructors to train the Malian army in peacekeeping tactics. The training mission will last for 15 months and has a significant cost.
The budget for this mission is quite substantial. It's a little over 12 million euros. We've already begun to use a significant chunk for infrastructure projects. So as you can see, the money is put to use in concrete ways and provides Mali with immediate aid.
Meanwhile, militants captured during the fight to secure Mali's northern regions have been taken to the capital Bamako. There, they'll stand trial on terrorism charges. But allegations of prisoner mistreatment at the hands of the Malian forces have emerged.
The day the military took me, they tried to beat me, to correct me. The day after, they questioned me to see if I was part of the Islamists.
Although military chiefs deny the claims, Prime Minister Diango Sissoko has promised any soldiers responsible for the abuses will be held to account. Will Took, Arise News.
Now, Congo is hosting Africa's largest literary festival this week. It is called Amazing Travelers, and it brings together more than 80 well-known writers and poets, most of them from Africa. The festival is in its 24th year, and as Arise News' Tina Millman reports, this year's theme, Africa is coming.
The 4-day event is taking place in several locations across Brazzaville, and it's targeting young people for the first time. Organizers aim to promote a stronger book culture on the continent and to encourage young Africans to read more.
We're planting seeds for the future. Just seeing all these young people filling this auditorium, seeing all these students here, it shows them there's a need to promote literature. But you don't just have music, you also have art, there's theatre, there's also film. So it's all there. Young people need to know they have no right not to be interested in literature and that literature can save you.
Personally, it has taught me a lot, especially about culture. I have met many people that I wouldn't usually get to meet. It has also allowed me to learn much more about Africa as well as the world.
Workshops, film screenings, photo and art exhibitions have attracted hundreds of young Congolese and many of African literature's more established stars.
Exchanging ideas in this day and age is very important. If the US knows what's happening in Africa, it's just a glimpse. Because if they learn about Africa through our literature, meaning through books that we as Africans have written, and it's from our point of view, it's much more interesting than discovering Africa through books written by Europeans about us. That's why it's important.
Que si ces Américains découvraient l'Afrique par les livres des autres, des Européens qui ont écrit sur nous. C'est pour ça que c'est important.
Congo has one of the highest youth literacy rates in Africa, with about 70% of young people able to read. But books are not readily available in many rural areas, and they are often too expensive for much of the population. Tina Millman, Arise News.
And on to sports now. Italian police have arrested a Slovenian match-fixing kingpin after he flew in from Singapore this morning. The man has been identified as 31-year-old Admir Sulcic. He arrived at Milan's Malpensa airport to find police waiting for him after a tip-off by Singapore authorities. In the Europa League, it's the second leg of matches tonight as teams look to progress into the last 16 of the competition. Lyon are hoping to bounce back against Tottenham Hotspur tonight. The French side need to overcome a 2-1 advantage after a late Gareth Bale goal last week gave Spurs a narrow lead. Reigning champions of Europa, Chelsea hold a 1-0 advantage going into tonight's game at Stamford Bridge. The Blues are heavy favourites to qualify when they take on Sparta Prague tonight.
And staying with the Europa League, Liverpool take on Zenit St. Petersburg in the Europa Cup. Zenit have a 2-0 advantage going into the game at Anfield, but Liverpool and their fans still believe they can deliver a miracle. Lance Santos reports.
2-0 down and staring down the barrel, most fans would be hard-pressed to believe. But not here, not Anfield. The fans here dare to dream. In fact, these fans believe in European miracles. The Kop expects. You don't have to go too far back to one of Liverpool's most famous comebacks. In 2005, Anfield rocked with emotion when Liverpool beat Chelsea 1-0 and went on to win their 5th European title. A man who was part of the losing side's backroom staff that day is now the man at the helm for the Reds.
The legend of Liverpool is based on these nights. If you walk around Melwood and you see the various quotes and comments from top players in the game and some of the best managers in the world, it's not the game that's talked about, it's the supporters. And it's such nights that really has made Liverpool what it is.
A defeat tonight rules Brendan Rodgers' side out of all competitions this season. Zenit St. Petersburg, on the other hand, are a side brimming with confidence. They know that even just one goal tonight would put the writing on the wall for Brendan Rodgers and his men. If it ain't broke, then don't fix it. The Russians are expected to name exactly the same side that cruised to victory last week. But back at Liverpool, the message is the same, whoever you ask. The crowd will get us through.
This is a competition that we always wanted to do well, and we always know the special nights, the European nights that Anfield, the crowd gives to us. So it will be an important game for us going forward to the season as well.
It's all set for a European miracle tonight. A sellout crowd at Anfield will inspire greatness and Liverpool will qualify for the last 16. That's if you believe in miracles. Tonight marks Brendan Rodgers' 150th European fixture, and if Liverpool fail to score at least twice, it may well be his last. Lance Santos, Arise News.
Now, Sunday is no doubt the biggest night of the year in Tinseltown, the 85th Annual Academy Awards. Hollywood stars are choosing their gowns, borrowing their jewels, and indulging in some very extreme beauty treatments. Arise News' Jason Mansoray has the story.
Hollywood's beautiful people want to look their best on the Oscars red carpet. Every year, arrivals are televised around the globe and often make bigger headlines than the films. This kind of high-octane glamour doesn't come easy. 50-year-old Demi Moore says she sticks leeches on her skin to detoxify her blood. And Gwyneth Paltrow once arrived at a premiere with her back covered with circular bruises from cupping, a kind of acupuncture said to encourage blood flow and ease stress. This year's hot ticket beauty treatment range from the ridiculously expensive to the just plain ridiculous. Beverly Hills plastic surgeon Paul Nassif offers the vampire facial. He removes a tube of blood from his patient, mixes it with a dermal filler, and injects it back into the skin.
The reason why we call it the vampire facelift is because we're using someone's own blood to inject back in the face. So we're taking the blood out and then injecting it in the face. So I assume that's the whole, the whole social stigma that everyone loves of vampires,
This black diamond nail varnish costs $250,000 a bottle. It has 275 carats of real uncut diamonds in it.
I had stores calling me saying, get the polish to us, get the polish to us. Of course, then, some people had bad opinions about it, and they said, what about the feed the children in Africa and this? And I always ask people the same question when that kind of comment comes out, and that is, we weren't paying for someone to go get killed in a war. We were not doing anything negative whatsoever. We were celebrating women. And what is wrong with that?
For shiny, lustrous hair, this all-natural hair treatment bar has created a conditioner made from bull's testicles. Reportedly based on an old family recipe from Persia, the paste is the result of boiling testicles to extract a broth of protein and hormones. The 85th Annual Academy Awards will be broadcast live from the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood this Sunday. Jason Mansoray, Arise News.
Can I just say that the price for beauty is very high?
Absolutely.
And usually there's pain involved in it.
Lots of it.
Yeah. I've never been to the Oscars. Have either of you guys?
No. Only on the telly.
But tell us in your time.
Well, I have a bit of a background in pageants, and so I know a little bit about those tricks. Now, this was in the low-tech days before Botox and all those other things. But do you know what firm grip is?
Careful.
Do you know? All right, be careful, be careful.
Yeah.
No. It is a sticky spray that basketball players use to help them palm the basketball. We would spray that on our bottoms to keep the swimsuit down so it wouldn't ride up. It's a firm grip.
That's spoil sport stuff, that, isn't it?
Yeah, Vaseline on our teeth so you could hold the smile and your lips don't stick to your teeth.
You should have put the sticky stuff on your teeth, didn't you, to keep your life like that?
No, because you don't want to. That's not an attractive lip.
No, that's not attractive.
Yeah.
No.
Also, double stick tape. That's a lifesaver.
Where's that go?
Keep clothing wherever you want it to be. Remember J-Lo's provocative dress at the Grammys?
Yeah.
Double stick tape all over the place.
Is that right?
Yes.
I could use some firm grip right now.
Could you? Let's talk about that later on, shall we? I just say that's probably you could use a bit of that on your suit, actually, a bit of firm grip, couldn't you? Look at things. It'll be all right in the end, though.
I'm not touching that. Yeah. But I am amazed at the lengths that celebrities go to look.
But you aren't, because it's their night to shine, because if you don't win anything, you feel an idiot for going, don't you? So you've got to actually look good in your grief, as it were.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is that the pictures last forever. It's not just about that night.
But you see, you were a winner, weren't you? That's the difference. You weren't number 2, you weren't number 3. You were the winner. So you can't empathise with people.
And everybody remembers the winner.
And they don't. And we all remember you.
Absolutely.
No, you don't.
Yes, we
please.
Do. What year was it?
What year was it, Michael?
Oh, let's not go there.
What title was it?
No.
1990?
Yeah, I like to say 1890 because it might as well have been. It was so long ago. All right, well, enough of that. Let's move on to something a little more noble. There is one person who is not getting carried away with all the Oscar glamour. The Italian doctor is star Open Heart. It's been nominated for an Academy Award in the short documentary category. The film is directed by Keith Davidson and tells the story of 8 Rwandan children and teens who travel for life-saving surgery at the Salam Center. Dr. Strada would not prefer to be in Los Angeles for Sunday's awards. He'd rather continue his life-saving work right there in the Sudan. The center is the only place in Africa to offer free life-saving heart surgery. So as Oscar talk turns to famous faces and designer dresses and double-stick tape, it would seem this year that the ceremony will also have, check this out, some heart.
Oh, nice. Well done. Well put.
Isn't that nice?
That's wonderful.
That's a
what
nice
What a
story.
trooper.
Yeah. So cheers to him.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a nice thing. Now, are you rooting for any of the big pictures that are up for awards?
Absolutely. There's 2 of them, actually.
2? Who? What?
Lincoln.
Yes.
And Argo.
I completely agree.
Did you manage to stay awake during Lincoln?
Oh,
all right?
goodness, Michael. I saw it twice.
It was riveting.
I saw it twice.
Well, it is, yeah, but you see, I thought Argo was the one, actually. I thought that was quite amazing. It was so tense all the way through, and such a laugh as well, because they were taking the mickey out of Hollywood, weren't they? Saying, do you want to do a film that's going to cost $1 million, goes nowhere? I'm your man to do it. It was tremendous.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's really a shame that Ben Affleck was not nominated as Best Director. It's really a travesty. But the movie is up for Best Picture. I think has a great chance.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, I guess that's going to do it for tonight.
Let's do it again. Same time tomorrow.
Have a good night.